her arms around her friend and murmuring, "We'll get through this together." For the first time since the proposal, Julia allowed herself to lean on the people who had always been her true foundation. With Megan and Olivia by her side, Julia began peeling back the layers of Daniel's deception. What she found sickened her. He hadn't just slipped into Rachel's life recently, he had been living two lives all along. With Julia, he was the dependable partner, the man who ate pasta on the couch, kissed her forehead, and called her his safe place. With Rachel, he was dazzling, lavish dinners, extravagant trips, his arm draped proudly around her in public. Julia realized with horror that she had been hidden, tucked away like a secret, while Rachel had been the woman he showcased. The betrayal deepened with every discovery, each truth another knife to her heart. But the final blow came not from Daniel, but from Rachel herself. One morning, scrolling absently through her phone, Julia froze. On her screen was a photo, Rachel's manicured hand held aloft, the diamond ring glinting in the sunlight. The same ring Julia had once held in her palm, believing it was her future. The caption read, "He said forever. I said yes." Julia's vision swam, her chest constricting so tightly she thought she might collapse. The world around her dissolved, replaced by a single truth: Daniel had never intended to give her forever. He had stolen her dreams and handed them to someone else with a smile. Tears blurred the screen as Julia whispered to herself, "That was supposed to be me." For the first time, she wasn't just heartbroken. She was erased. Julia arrived at Daniel's apartment with her heart pounding so violently she could feel it in her throat. The velvet ring box, small yet unbearably heavy, burned against her palm. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head, but when he opened the door, looking effortlessly polished as always, her breath faltered. Still, she stepped inside, her jaw set, refusing to let him charm her back into silence. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharper than she expected. Daniel arched a brow, feigning confusion, but she wasn't going to be fooled. With trembling fingers, Julia pulled the ring box from her bag and snapped it open between them. The diamond caught the light like a cruel joke. "Whose name is engraved in this, Daniel?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Mine. Or hers?" The words echoed through the room, stripping away the last pretense between them. For a split second, his face tightened, then relaxed into a practiced smirk. He tried to step closer, but Julia held her ground. This was no longer the woman who had believed his lies. This was the woman demanding the truth. Her tears burned, but her spine remained straight, fueled by the knowledge that this confrontation was not just about Rachel, it was about reclaiming herself from years of manipulation. Daniel's mask slipped, revealing the arrogance that had always lurked beneath his charm. "God, Julia," he snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. "Do you really want the truth? Fine. Rachel is better for my image. She's younger, she's glamorous, she looks good on my arm. That's the reality." His words cut like blades, each one tearing away the illusions Julia had clung to. "You were comfortable," he added, his voice cold. "Safe. But you were never enough." Julia's breath hitched as though she'd been struck, the weight of his cruelty pressing down on her chest. 4 years, she had sacrificed, believed, waited for him to choose her. And now, he stood there, unapologetic, confirming her deepest fear: she had never been his choice. Her hands shook, but she didn't back down. She held his gaze, even as tears streaked down her cheeks. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice trembling with both heartbreak and fury. "You stole years of my life." But Daniel only shrugged, his arrogance twisting into something venomous. "You should have known better." The venom in his words, the deliberate cruelty, shattered any trace of the man she thought she loved. He wasn't a victim of confusion or circumstance. He was deliberate, calculated, and heartless. Before Daniel could spew another poisonous word, a voice rang out from the doorway. "Enough." Both turned to see Rachel standing there, her face pale but her eyes blazing. Megan lingered just behind her, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and solidarity. Julia's heart lurched. Megan had orchestrated this, ensuring Rachel heard the truth for herself. Daniel's face drained of color as Rachel stepped forward, her heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. "You told me I was the only one," she spat, her voice trembling with fury. You told me she was just some jealous ex who couldn't let go. But now I see exactly what you are. Julia and Rachel locked eyes for the first time, not as rivals, but as women bound by betrayal. For once, Daniel's slick words faltered. He scrambled, trying to spin it, weaving lies as fast as he could, but neither woman budged. His double life, so carefully crafted, collapsed under the weight of their shared truth. Julia straightened, her tears drying into resolve. Rachel crossed her arms, glaring at the man who had tried to play them both. Together, they stood united, no longer his puppets. Daniel's voice rose, frantic and desperate, but the more he spoke, the smaller he seemed. His power dissolved, leaving him exposed, nothing more than a coward who had finally lost control. Julia felt the strangest calm wash over her as she turned toward the door, Rachel beside her. For the first time, she wasn't the broken one. Daniel was. And his empire of lies was nothing but dust at their feet. The night of the confrontation, Julia didn't just leave Daniel's apartment, she left behind the ghost of the woman who had once waited for him to choose her. The velvet ring box was the last thing she placed on his table, her parting words sharp and steady, "You don't get to choose me anymore." When she walked out, the cold night air hit her lungs like freedom. The first thing she did was block his number. No hesitation. Then she went home, opened her phone, and deleted every photo of them, vacations, date nights, stolen selfies in the kitchen. Each swipe felt like peeling back another layer of suffocation. When she was done, silence filled her apartment, and for once it wasn't loneliness. It was relief. For the first time in years, Daniel's shadow no longer reached her. Of course, the ache remained, grief for the years lost, the love she had given so freely, but she understood something vital. Grief and love weren't the same as weakness. She packed up the few things of his left in her place and left them outside her door for Megan to collect. Julia wasn't going to carry his memory anymore. Her life, her heart, her dreams, they no longer belonged to him. They were hers again. And she wasn't going back. In the days that followed, Rachel reached out. Their first meeting was tentative, awkward, the kind of encounter that could have been drenched in rivalry. But betrayal had made them allies, not enemies. Over coffee, Rachel admitted how deeply Daniel had deceived her too, how many lies she had believed because she wanted to. Julia nodded, understanding all too well. Instead of bitterness, a strange kind of solidarity blossomed between them. Both women had been promised forever, and both had been discarded when it suited him. Now, sitting across from each other, they reclaimed their dignity in the act of sharing their pain. Rachel squeezed Julia's hand before they parted. "You're stronger than you know," she said softly. Julia left that cafe with tears in her eyes, not of sorrow but of gratitude, because she wasn't alone anymore. That realization seeped deeper when she finally dialed her father's number after years of silence. The conversation wasn't easy, anger and grief still sat between them. But it was real. He admitted his failures, his absence, his shame. Julia admitted her resentment, her longing for family. It wasn't a neat reconciliation, but it was a beginning. And for Julia, beginnings mattered more than endings. Slowly, she began piecing together a life that wasn't defined by what Daniel had taken, but by what she was ready to reclaim. One quiet evening, Julia sat at her desk with the nursing fellowship application she had once abandoned because Daniel had convinced her to stay close, be practical. The form stared back at her, blank spaces waiting to be filled, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't hesitate. She filled in every line with a steady hand, each word a declaration. She was choosing herself. When she sealed the envelope, she felt lighter, as if she'd just signed a contract with her own future. This wasn't about escaping the past, it was about building something new, something entirely her own. She imagined her mother's smile, her sister's proud embrace, even her father's tentative nod. 4 years, Julia had waited for love to anchor her, for someone else to make her feel whole. But now she understood, she was her own anchor. Love, when it came again, would be a choice, not a crutch. She no longer needed a man's promises to validate her worth. That night, as she journaled by her window with the city skyline glowing beyond, she wrote, "Betrayal didn't break me. It introduced me to myself." Julia smiled faintly, closed the notebook, and whispered into the stillness, This time, I choose me. And with that, she finally felt free. The necklace had once been her favorite. A delicate silver chain with a heart-shaped pendant, given to her by Daniel on their first anniversary. Back then, she had worn it proudly, a constant reminder that she belonged to someone. But now, holding it in her hand, Julia felt only the weight of captivity. The heart didn't symbolize love anymore, it symbolized the years she had spent waiting for scraps of affection, mistaking his control for devotion. She sat at her kitchen table with a small box, her hand steady as she placed the necklace inside. Beside it, she slipped a handwritten note, simple but fierce: "May this never be someone else's cage." She sealed the package, addressing it to a local women's shelter. Her chest ached, but there was a release in it, an exhale of the past. As she carried the box to the mailbox on the corner, the autumn air brushed her face, cool and sharp, as though the world itself was acknowledging her act of letting go. Dropping the box inside, Julia pressed her hand against the metal, whispering a goodbye not just to Daniel, but to the version of herself who had once clung to him. She walked away lighter, the chain no longer around her neck, the cage no longer around her heart. A few days later, Julia found herself at a seaside cafe, a place she and Megan used to visit when they were younger but one she hadn't returned to in years. The air was filled with the scent of salt water and coffee, waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. She sat by the window with her journal open, the pages waiting like an old friend. Her pen hovered for a moment before she began to write, not about him, not about the betrayal, but about herself. "Betrayal didn't end me, it introduced me to myself," she scrawled across the page. The words startled her, raw and true, the kind of realization that only comes after surviving the storm. She paused, staring out at the horizon where the ocean met the sky, endless and untamed. For the first time in a long time, Julia didn't feel trapped by what she'd lost. She felt curious about what was ahead. She sipped her coffee, letting the warmth steady her, and smiled faintly at the thought of new beginnings, imperfect, uncertain, but hers. In that cafe, surrounded by strangers and seagulls, she didn't feel broken anymore. She felt whole, as though the missing pieces she had once tried to find in Daniel had been inside her all along, simply waiting to be claimed. As evening fell, Julia walked along the beach, her shoes dangling from one hand, the sand cool beneath her feet. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and gold, the sun slowly dipping toward the horizon. She stopped for a moment, breathing in the salty air, the wind lifting strands of her hair. She thought of the past, not with longing, but with acceptance. Daniel was a chapter closed, a lesson etched deep, but he no longer defined her story. She did. Watching the tide roll in and out, she felt the rhythm sync with her own heartbeat, steady, alive, free. A faint smile tugged at her lips, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because she knew she no longer needed perfection to feel at peace. She was free to stumble, to grow, to choose. She turned back toward the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance, her journal tucked under her arm like a promise. 4 years, she had waited for someone else to write her story, to give her love, to grant her a future. Now, as the sun sank and the sky deepened into twilight, Julia smiled with quiet certainty. She was finally writing her own story, and this time, the pen was firmly in her hands.